Shalom, my friends. Right now, as you watch this video, there are bills piling up on your table, creditors calling your phone, and you lie awake at night wondering when your financial breakthrough will finally come. You've prayed, you've worked hard, you've declared prosperity over your life dozens of times, but your bank account tells a completely different story. And here's the truth that nobody wants to hear. God is not ignoring your prayers. The problem is that you're asking Him to fill something you haven't prepared. You're expecting the divine flow of abundance to pour into vessels that simply don't exist. And this is exactly what I'm about to reveal to you through one of the most powerful and misunderstood stories in Torah. There's an ancient principle hidden in the Hebrew Scriptures that separates those who prosper from those who remain stuck in financial struggle, regardless of how much faith they claim to have. It's the principle of the prepared vessel, and it's found in a desperate widow's story in 2 Kings chapter 4. This woman was about to lose her children to slavery because of debt, and the prophet Elisha asked her one question that would change everything. What do you have in your house? Not what do you want or what do you're praying for, but what do you actually have? Because God's multiplication doesn't work on wishes and dreams. It works on prepared containers. It works on what you've already set in place, no matter how small it seems. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you why your financial situation hasn't changed despite all your prayers, and more importantly, how to prepare the vessels that God can actually fill. This isn't motivational speaking. This is ancient Torah wisdom that has created generational wealth for those who understood it, and has left countless others wondering why their blessings never materialized. The widow gathered empty jars, and the oil flowed until every single jar was full. But here's what shocks people. The oil stopped the moment there were no more jars to fill. The limitation wasn't in God's supply. The limitation was in her preparation. And that's exactly what's happening in your financial life right now. You're standing at the edge of financial disaster, and you know exactly what that feels like. It's the sinking feeling in your stomach when another unexpected expense appears. It's the shame of having to decline invitations because you can't afford them. It's the exhaustion of working multiple jobs and still watching your debt grow instead of shrink. And in the midst of this crisis, you've been taught to speak things into existence, to visualize abundance, to make vision boards filled with images of wealth you don't have. But month after month, year after year, those images remain fantasies, while your real bank account remains painfully empty. The Torah teaches something radically different, and it starts with acknowledging what actually exists in your life right now, not what you wish existed. The widow in 2 Kings 4 was in the worst possible situation. Her husband had died, leaving her with crushing debt that she couldn't pay. The creditors were literally coming to take her 2 sons as slaves to settle what was owed. This wasn't a minor inconvenience or a temporary setback. This was total financial catastrophe with the added horror of losing her children. And yet, when Elisha the prophet arrived, he didn't tell her to positive think her way out of debt. He didn't tell her to just have more faith or to speak prosperity declarations over her life. Instead, he asked her the most practical, down-to-earth question imaginable. What do you have in your house? Because the miracle you're waiting for cannot manifest in emptiness. It can only multiply what already exists in prepared form. Here's where most people get stuck in their financial journey, and it's why they stay broke despite their belief in God's provision. They're focused entirely on what they lack, what they need, what they're praying to receive. They've created elaborate wish lists in their minds about the income they want, the lifestyle they desire, the financial freedom they're claiming. But they haven't prepared a single jar to receive it. They haven't created the structures, the systems, the habits, or the actual vessels that would hold wealth if it came. God doesn't pour oil into imaginary containers. He fills what you've physically, practically, and strategically prepared. And the painful truth is that most people in financial struggle have prepared nothing. They have beautiful wishes, but zero vessels. The Hebrew word for vessel, keli, appears throughout Torah in contexts that reveal a profound economic principle. A keli isn't just a container. It's a prepared instrument designed for a specific purpose. In the ancient understanding, the vessel determines not only what you can receive, but how much you can receive. The widow's miracle wasn't about God creating oil from nothing. The oil already existed in her small jar. The miracle was in the multiplication that happened when she prepared additional vessels. This teaches us something revolutionary about how divine prosperity actually works. God multiplies what you steward, not what you wish for. He fills what you prepare, not what remains in your imagination. Throughout Torah, we see this pattern repeat itself again and again. When the Israelites were in the wilderness and God sent manna from heaven, He didn't pour it into their tents while they slept. Each person had to go out with containers and gather what they needed. The provision was guaranteed, but the preparation was required. When Noah was told about the coming flood, God didn't make the ark appear miraculously. Noah had to build it, board by board, for 120 years before a single drop of rain fell. The salvation was certain, but the vessel had to be constructed first. This is the pattern of heaven. Provision is promised, but preparation is mandatory. And most people are waiting for provision while completely neglecting preparation. In modern terms, here's what this means for your financial life. You can't pray for a business blessing if you haven't registered the business. You can't ask God to multiply your investments if you haven't opened an investment account. You can't expect financial wisdom to transform your life if you haven't created a system to track your income and expenses. These aren't just practical steps. These are spiritual vessels. They're the jars you're setting out for God to fill. And here's the shocking reality that most preachers won't tell you. God is already releasing the oil of prosperity. The flow is already happening. But if you haven't prepared vessels, that flow is simply passing you by while you wonder why you're not experiencing the breakthrough you've been promised. The oil stops when the jars run out, which means your financial limitation isn't about God's willingness. It's about your preparation. Desire is cheap. Everyone wants to be wealthy. Everyone dreams of financial freedom. Everyone wishes they had more money. The world is filled with people who desperately desire prosperity but remain trapped in poverty year after year, decade after decade. And the reason is painfully simple. Desire without preparation is nothing more than fantasy. It's the equivalent of being hungry and staring at pictures of food instead of learning to cook. The emotional intensity of your desire means absolutely nothing if you haven't prepared to receive what you're asking for. This is why the Torah is so specific about the widow's actions. She didn't just cry to Elisha about her terrible situation. She didn't just express her desire to avoid losing her sons. She went door to door gathering empty jars. She prepared vessels. The human mind is wired to confuse emotional intensity with actual progress. You can feel desperate for money and mistake that desperation for action. You can spend hours visualizing wealth and convince yourself you're doing something productive. You can pray fervently for financial breakthrough and believe that the prayer itself is the solution. But none of these activities create vessels. None of them prepare containers for God to fill. They're all focused on the desire side of the equation while completely ignoring the preparation side. And here's what's tragic. The more intense your desire becomes without corresponding preparation, the more frustrated and bitter you become with God. You start to believe He's ignoring you, that He doesn't care, that the promises don't apply to you. But God hasn't changed. He's still filling vessels. You just haven't brought any vessels to be filled. This is the moment where everything shifts for people who actually escape financial struggle. It's not when they want money more or pray harder or visualize better. It's when they stop focusing on their desires and start focusing on their preparation. It's when they ask themselves the same question Elisha asked the widow, what do I actually have in my house? What skills exist in me right now? What relationships do I currently possess? What time is actually available in my schedule? What knowledge have I already acquired? These become the first jar, the jar with the oil already in it. And then comes the critical move. They start gathering more jars. They don't wait until they feel ready or have everything figured out. They start preparing vessels before the oil begins to flow. They open the bank account before the money arrives. They create the business structure before the customers show up. They develop the skills before the opportunity presents itself. Because prepared vessels attract divine filling. Here's the part of the widow's story that most people completely miss, and it's the key to understanding why some people experience exponential financial growth while others remain stuck at the same income level for decades. The text says that the oil kept flowing until there were no more jars. Read that again carefully. The oil didn't stop because God ran out of blessing. It didn't stop because the widow's faith wavered. It stopped because she ran out of containers. The limitation of the miracle was directly tied to the number of vessels she had prepared. If she had gathered 10 jars, she got 10 jars worth of oil. If she had gathered 100 jars, she would have received 100 jars worth. The mathematics of multiplication in God's economy is brutally simple. You receive in proportion to what you prepare to receive. This principle destroys the comfortable mythology that many people have built around prosperity. They want to believe that if they just get one big break, one lottery win, one sudden windfall, all their financial problems will be solved forever. But the Torah shows us something different. Financial blessing doesn't come as one massive event. It comes as continuous multiplication into prepared vessels. The widow could have stopped after filling 3 jars and been content with that level of provision. But she kept bringing more jars, and the oil kept flowing. This is how generational wealth is actually built. It's not about getting lucky once. It's about consistently expanding your capacity to receive and steward resources. Every new skill you learn is a new jar. Every business system you create is a new jar. Every investment account you open is a new jar. And the oil of prosperity will fill every single jar you prepare. Now here's the question that should absolutely terrify you if you're serious about changing your financial situation. How many jars have you actually gathered? Be honest with yourself. In the past year, what new vessels have you prepared to receive God's blessing? Did you take a single course to improve your financial literacy? Did you open one investment account, even if you could only put $10 in it? Did you create any system to track your spending? Did you develop one new skill that could increase your income? Did you build any structure that could hold wealth if it came to you tomorrow? Or have you spent the entire year simply wishing, praying, and hoping for a miracle while preparing absolutely nothing? Because I can tell you right now, with absolute certainty, that if you haven't gathered any new jars, you won't experience any new oil. The flow is there. God's willingness to bless you is not the problem. The problem is that you have nowhere for that blessing to land. The widow's miracle follows a specific sequence, and this sequence is not accidental. It's the blueprint for how divine provision actually works in the physical realm. First, she had the crisis. Then she went to the prophet. Then the prophet asked about what she currently had. Then she acknowledged the 1 jar of oil. Then she was instructed to gather empty vessels. Then she had to borrow jars from neighbors. Then she had to shut the door. Then she began to pour. Then the oil multiplied. Then she sold the oil. Then she paid her debts. Then she lived on the remainder. Every single step in this sequence matters, and most people who are struggling financially are trying to skip the middle steps. They want to jump from crisis directly to living on the remainder without doing any of the preparation in between. Let's break down what this sequence reveals about activating provision in your own life. The crisis creates urgency, but urgency alone doesn't solve anything. Going to wise counsel, the prophet, gives you perspective, but perspective without action is just information. Acknowledging what you currently have, even if it's small, is where faith becomes practical. This is the step where most people stumble because they're ashamed of how little they have, but the widow didn't hide her poverty. She didn't pretend she had more than 1 jar. She was honest about her starting point, which is the only way to build from where you actually are, rather than where you wish you were. Then comes the gathering of vessels, which requires humility. She had to go to her neighbors and borrow jars. She had to let people know she needed help. She couldn't maintain an image of having it all together while preparing to receive a miracle. The closing of the door is perhaps the most misunderstood part of the sequence. Elisha told her to shut the door with her and her sons inside before beginning to pour. This wasn't about secrecy or hiding the miracle. It was about creating a space of focused action without the interference of doubt, mockery, or distraction. When you're in the process of preparing vessels and beginning to see multiplication, there will be voices telling you it won't work, that you're wasting your time, that you should give up. The closed door represents the boundary you must create to protect your process until it produces results. Then, and only then, after the jars are filled, do you open the door again and engage with the marketplace. You sell the oil, you handle your obligations, and you live from the abundance. This is the sequence, and you cannot shortcut it. Every step builds on the previous step. And if you're stuck financially, you need to identify which step you're avoiding and do that step right now. Everything I've shared so far is useless if it remains theoretical. So let's get extremely practical about what vessel preparation looks like in your actual financial life right now. First, you need to identify your one jar of oil, the thing you currently have that God can multiply. For the widow, it was literally a small jar of oil. For you, it might be a skill, a relationship, some knowledge, or even just time. The key is that it must be something real, something you actually possess right now, not something you hope to have someday. Write this down. This is your starting jar. This is what exists in your house today that God can multiply if you prepare more vessels to receive the multiplication. Second, you need to gather your empty jars, and this is where the work begins. An empty jar, in financial terms, is any structure or system that can hold wealth. Opening a savings account you don't have money for yet. That's an empty jar. Creating a business entity before you have any clients. That's an empty jar. Starting a spreadsheet to track income and expenses, even when the numbers are embarrassing, that's an empty jar. Taking a free online course to learn about investing, that's an empty jar. Writing down 3 potential ways you could earn additional income, that's an empty jar. Reading one book about financial management, that's an empty jar. Every single one of these actions creates a container that God can fill. And here's what's powerful. The act of preparing the jar often attracts the oil before you even finish preparing. The moment you open that investment account, you start noticing investment opportunities. The moment you create the business structure, potential clients start appearing. The moment you track your spending, you find money you didn't know you had. Third, you need to understand that vessel preparation is not a one-time event. It's a lifestyle. The widow didn't gather jars once and then stop. She kept bringing more jars as long as the oil kept flowing. This means your financial growth is directly tied to your commitment to continuous preparation. Every month, you should be adding new jars. Every quarter, you should be expanding your capacity to receive. This might mean improving your skills through education. It might mean expanding your network by building strategic relationships. It might mean creating new income streams by starting small side projects. It might mean increasing your investment contributions as your income grows. The specific jars will be different for each person, but the principle is universal. The oil stops when the jars run out. If you want continuous financial increase, you need continuous vessel preparation. And if you're experiencing financial stagnation, it's because you stopped gathering jars. You got comfortable with the vessels you already had, and the multiplication stopped because there was nowhere else for it to go. My friends, I need you to understand something that will change everything if you truly grasp it. God has never been the bottleneck in your financial situation. The flow of provision, blessing, and prosperity from heaven is constant and abundant. It's flowing right now as you watch this video. The question isn't whether God is willing to bless you. The question is whether you have prepared vessels to receive what He's already pouring out. And this is why so many people stay broke despite their faith, despite their prayers, despite their declarations. They're standing under the waterfall of divine provision with no buckets in their hands, wondering why they're not getting wet. They're asking God to fill what they desire instead of preparing what they can actually fill. And then they blame God, they blame circumstances, they blame other people, when the real issue is that they never gathered the jars. The widow's story ends with complete financial transformation. She sold the oil, she paid all her debts, and she lived on what remained. Notice that sequence. She paid her debts first, then lived on the remainder. She didn't use the miracle oil to upgrade her lifestyle before handling her obligations. This is wisdom that most people violate, which is why they cycle through the same financial struggles repeatedly. But more importantly, notice that her transformation was permanent. The text doesn't say the oil miraculously appeared again next month. It was a one-time multiplication of what she had, which produced enough abundance to solve her crisis and sustain her going forward. This is what vessel preparation does. It creates the capacity for a breakthrough that doesn't just solve today's problem, but establishes a new financial foundation for your future. And that foundation is built on one principle. You prepare vessels, God fills them, and you steward what's filled wisely. So here's what I want you to do immediately after watching this video. I want you to ask yourself the same question Elisha asked the widow. What do you have in your house? What actually exists in your life right now? That could be your first jar. Write it down. Don't exaggerate it. Don't minimize it. Just write the truth. Then I want you to identify 5 empty jars you're going to gather this month. 5 structures, systems, or preparations that will create capacity for blessing to flow into your life. Maybe it's opening that account you've been putting off. Maybe it's finally tracking your spending. Maybe it's reaching out to someone who could mentor you financially. Maybe it's taking that free course on investing. Whatever they are, write them down and commit to gathering those jars before the month ends, because I promise you, the oil is already flowing. The prosperity you've been praying for is already being released. The only question is whether you'll have jars ready to receive it when it arrives. Shalom, my friends, and may your vessels overflow with the blessing of the Almighty.